This is PT75, section 1, or first logical reasoning section, question 14. And we're asking, like, what is the role played by this thing in the argument? So if we look at what they're talking about, we're looking at the claim that society would not be better off if the government enacted laws requiring people to be polite to each other. So some people try to jump right in and try to figure this out just from seeing it in the question. But let's figure out what's the role of each sentence in this argument. That's exactly what we should be doing when we're doing reading comp. We want to figure out why did they include this sentence and how does it structure the argument. So if people refrain from being impolite to one another, the condition of society would be greatly improved. But society would not be better off if the government enacted laws requiring people to be polite to each other. Enforcing such laws would create even more problems than does impoliteness. So we've got a couple of conditions. The first sentence is giving us, like, if this is what happened, if people weren't impolite, here's what would happen. Here's like our general world. Sentence 2 is kind of like plugging in here and saying, okay, it's not better off if this happened. Like, A is like a general fact, B is, or a general claim, B is another claim that's like much more specific and it interacts with that first claim. The third sentence, is talking about enforcing laws. It is expounding upon this idea that it would not be better off. So, the second sentence is being supported by by the very last sentence. And that first sentence is just kind of like the context. Um, so ultimately, these other two sentences, the first and the last one, are working to support that middle sentence as a conclusion. So A is looking like a really good answer. It is definitely drawn the conclusion drawn by the argument as a whole. But let's look at the other answer choices. B, it is cited as evidence for the generalization that is the argument's overall conclusion. So it's definitely not being cited as evidence. That would be referring to that last sentence. Um, C, it is cited as evidence for the assertion used to support the argument's overall conclusion. If this was an accurate statement, our sentence would be supporting another conclusion, but we don't have like any we don't have any conclusion that that's supporting. We would call that an intermediary conclusion. There's main conclusions and intermediate conclusions. Um, the second sentence is an example of an ultimate main conclusion. It's the only thing being supported. D, it is cited as an illustration of a generalization that serves as the main premise of the argument. This is not illustrating anything, it's being supported. Premises do the supporting and conclusions are supported. E, it describes a phenomenon that the conclusion of the argument purports to explain. So this is kind of like, oh, this is a generalized example, it's an illustration. The argument isn't explaining anything. So we want to make sure that we're careful and we just identify that this is the conclusion. This is the main conclusion being supported by all the other sentences. If this was something that was being illustrated, we might say, oh, I've noticed that when Sally goes down the street, she, um, I don't know, she always says please and thank you when people offer her something from the lemonade stand. Um, like maybe this is that phenomenon. Um, and then Sally like lives on Bloom Street, like, and then maybe like the overall conclusion is, oh, people from Bloom Street are really nice. So they'd say, like, maybe they open with people from Bloom Street are really nice. Sally lives on Bloom Street and she always says thank you and please and thank you, like she's incredibly polite. That would be a great example of E, a phenomenon that the conclusion is trying to explain. Maybe if it was like, if we looked at D, we might have a situation where, everyone on Bloom Street is incredibly polite. I saw illustration of a generalization. So like the generalization would be everybody who is on the street is incredibly polite and helpful. And then we have a sentence. The sentence in question would be, I think it's very similar to E actually. Like Sally always says please and thank you. And like that sentence would be like that illustration. Whereas in E, we have like the overall phenomenon, like it could take multiple sentences to describe like what it is, like Sally going down the street saying thank you whenever people offer her lemonade. Like, and then, the conclusion might be like, um, conclusion purporting to explain, like, I think this is because her parents like treated her very, very well, or something like that, like, and trained her in manners. Who knows? I digress. But ultimately, we just want to remember that our conclusion is the one being supported by everything, even if it's being supported by other intermediary or subsidiary conclusions. And our premise is going to be doing the supporting. And a premise can be a fact, it can be a principle, it can be, whatever we need it to be, but it's all going to point to the conclusion as the purpose for writing this argument.